Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding from the Mayor of the Borough.
Before I open the meeting, I'd like to invite the Reverend John Drake to say a prayer for us.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for all that you provide for the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, for the funds entrusted to us, the facilities we use, and the people who serve in our civic life. Thank you that you care for each resident of the borough and hear the cries of the needy. In the face of many challenges, we pray that you would grant wisdom to this council as they consider the budget setting process. Enable them to deploy resources with justice, effectiveness, and for the good of all. We pray this in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend John. Good evening. I would like to welcome everyone to this hybrid budget council meeting. My name is Neil Knowles. I'm the Mayor of the Royal Borough of Windsor Maidenhead, and I will be chairing this meeting. Please note that I'm waiving the requirement within the council constitution procedure that requires members to stand when addressing the meeting. Please remain seated as the microphones work better. The meeting is being both recorded and streamed live on YouTube. I would like to remind all attendees, whether here in the room or in the Zoom meeting, that participation indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting, it will continue to be available in the public domain. Please respect that during the meeting, I will need to hold and take time to discuss procedural matters with officers. We will now move to agenda item 1. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you. I've received apologies from Councillor Wilson.
No other late apologies? Thank you very much. We now come to agenda item 2, the minutes of the previous meetings in October. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I know Councillor Walters was intending to be here, but in his, as the chair is absent, I do apologise, and I'm sure he will give his apologies.
Thank you, Councillor. That'll be noted. Councillor Werner.
And I gather Kashmir is struggling to get here, so if I can present his apologies as well.
All of those are now recorded. Now we come to agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meetings in October and November. We're dealing with each set in turn. Firstly, with the October minutes. They were circulated and asked for any amendments to be sent to Democratic Services. Are there any comments or issues with the October minutes? Anybody may have? No hands are raised. Therefore, I propose the minutes are agreed. Is that seconded by anybody? Councillor Werner. Can all in the present indicate by raising your hand if you support that recommendation? Any against? None, so therefore carried. We now move on to the second set of minutes, the November minutes. Are there any comments or issues to be raised in relation to the November minutes? None that I can see. In that case, I propose that the November minutes are agreed. Is that seconded? Councillor Werner. Can that be agreed unanimously? Therefore, carried. The next item is on agenda item 3 about declarations of interest. If any councillor has an interest to declare, please indicate by raising your hand and I will come to you in turn. None? Anybody joining online with any declarations of interest? Excellent. We now then move to agenda item 4, which are the Mayor's communications. It's been a long time since the last meeting, and I'm not going to give you the world's longest slideshow this evening. When you see my catalogue of activities, you'll understand why. And plus, this is a serious meeting. But for those people who've become addicted to my slideshow, it will be available on social media after the meeting, so you can see. But Kirsty will bring up the list, so we can just observe what that list is. There's quite a few things. I think it was said to me actually by about 2 previous mayors who said, "You've never worked hard as a mayor unless you've done Christmas." And I think everybody will agree. Everybody wants a piece of you. And there's quite a few items here. We'll not dwell on them, but some of them are half an hour, 2 hours. Some of them are just very short things. So if we just scroll through them, as you can see, I'm not going to do a slideshow in this case. Lots and lots. The last one. So there are the Mayor's communications. I'm pleased to see, if we pause for a second to let Councillor Waters get into position. We'll carry on a bit, but it's nice to see you here, Councillor Waters. We'll carry on. We're in a good position there. And if we can make a note to remove the it's worth the wait. We have to wait till everybody's comfortable here. Nice to see you, Leo. We're on to the next agenda item, number 5, which are the public questions. And we have 12 public questions this evening. Members of the public who submitted questions in advance of the meeting were notified yesterday that written answers to each question had been published to the council website and will be displayed on the screen during the meeting at the start to give context to the supplementary question, which they are able to ask if they so desire. We have a total of 30 minutes in the meeting for these supplementary questions. Any supplementary questions not dealt with during the meeting will be dealt with by way of a written answer. I will now invite each public questioner to take the stand while we put the question up that they asked and the answer, and then we'll invite them, should they wish, to ask a supplementary question. John Baldwin, if you'd like to take their stand and just wait a moment until the question comes up. This is the original question, and the reply. Councillor Baldwin, if you'd like to ask your supplementary question.
Thank you. Members of the public must give a minimum of 84 hours notice of our questions, which are restricted to 60 words. It smacks of hindrance when in return, we are only given a little over 24 hours to consider your replies, often of much greater length and complexity, from which we must frame a coherent supplementary question. That said, thank you for the written answer. It is likely that you may not be able to reply to the following off the top of your head. If you do need to promise a written response, please commit to a date, and could all councillors extend that same courtesy to every questioner? What percentage of each category is covered by price-controlled contracts, and must the remainder of accommodation and/or care be purchased on the open market?
If I can invite Councillor De Campo to reply.
I can't give you the percentage, I apologise. Yes, the remainder are sold on the open market. They're called spot placements. In terms of a deadline, I don't want to overpromise and under-deliver, but I will give you a response as soon as I can, and I will confirm the date tomorrow when I speak to officers. If not, the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is again asked by John Baldwin of Bourne Ward. If we can have the original question and answer up, please. If I can invite John Baldwin to ask a supplementary question, should you so wish.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the written answer. The ultra-low refusal rate shocked me, and I was flabbergasted by the argument that this revealed a change in culture. Please forgive an old cynic, but I and this council have heard that line many times before. It is equally arguable that officers, after early denials, simply found other ways of finessing their needs past your very blunt defence. You announced this panel in September of 2023, since when the financial position has deteriorated markedly. I know thousands of residents who must balk at spending a fiver, let alone £500. Isn't it long overdue time to lower the limit?
Councillor Jones, if you could respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, that is a constitutional change. You know, there is spending limits that have been put in place. I wouldn't like to see officer time taken up for budgeted, because these are budgeted items. These aren't new items. This spending panel is whether budgeted items are necessary now. So these are actually in the budget, not new items. And I wouldn't like to see officer time being taken up with smaller amounts. We have decided that this is the right amount to ensure that officers are not taken away from their day-to-day jobs to provide every week, but it is high enough and it is low enough that we can ensure that there isn't unnecessary spending. It was decided, it was discussed with senior officers. There are senior officers on the panel, and I can't see any reason why that should change at the moment, given I get sight of all the spending reviews, and I have no evidence that that should be changed now.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Our next question is on Zoom, I believe, from John Davey of Clewer and Dedworth Westward. There's the original question.
Yeah, there we go. Hang on, cancel back here.
And there was a written response about the winter wheel. This was kind of an amalgamation of a few things, wasn't it? That came through.
Two questions.
Two questions and one response. And the response is actually from Councillor Josh Reynolds, And a supplementary question, please, Mr. Davey, if you have one.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Turning Alexander Gardens into a theme park all year round instead of a place of tranquility for residents and biodiversity is only acceptable given the Section 4 looming if the business case makes sense. As I see it, you are leaving £500,000 on the table, assuming a 50% occupancy. The basic maths don't even add up on the planning application. And RBWM expected to pay for the electricity and from their share while all the contractors' costs are taken out. This is currently a very one-sided business deal. Some might say Tory-esque. Please, please, please ensure you get a better deal before signing. The triathlon fees are based on Alexander Gardens being worth 5k a day. Using that model, the 30k rent should be nearer 750k. My question is threefold. Has the triathlon set in the shadow of Windsor Castle, a huge sales factor for the event, been cancelled for 2024? Have all other parties who have been using Alexander Gardens this summer been consulted and compensated for their loss? And has the lost income been factored into the budget? Thank you.
John, and good to see you again. I think for me, this is really about striking a balance between the historical setting of Windsor and the park, and having a new attraction for Windsor that both tourists and residents alike can enjoy. And as I've said a few times, seeing the town from a different angle. I think for me, that's the key driver here. As I said in my original response, no contracts have been signed as of yet, and we're very keen that there have not been an agreement. So you know what, at this time, we are open to working with the applicant to see what they can do. It's not a contractor-council relationship. This is the same as us letting any other space in our park to groups. So I'm really keen that we get this for our tourists, for our residents, but we need to do it at a way that's right for the council to help our residents to be able to invest in our towns.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. The next question is also from Mr. Davey, from Dedworth. If we could have that original question and answer displayed, please.
Was there a chart?
Yeah.
That's the detail.
It's quite a big answer, but that's the graph that was requested of the council tax charges back to 2010. Mr. David, do you have a supplementary question you wish to ask?
I do.
This is for Councillor Jones, obviously.
Yeah. Thank you for going that extra mile, Lynn, and for taking your responsibilities very seriously. It must be a nightmare having them at the moment trying to work out the actual financial reality given what you've inherited. From the numbers provided using basic maths, accepting council works in a different way to normal businesses, essentially if there had been more money it would have been spent to show a balanced budget. That being said, if we had started with a 100 million budget in 2010-11, we would now have a budget of 141 million for next year. Instead, we're looking essentially at the same budget as 14 years ago. As for the 418 million we coulda, shoulda, would have had, would it be fair to say in round numbers, if the council was run like a business, then we'd potentially have 200 million balance instead of a 200 million pound deficit in the bank?
John Davey, and I can't, I haven't got the figures in front of me, so I can't confirm your maths. What I can say is that if maximum council tax increases had been applied since 2011, then council tax would now sit at £1,732.58. And on our council tax base, that would provide an extra £35.5 million. So they're very similar figures that you've quoted. So I would suggest that your figures seem correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Moving on to our next question, which is from Sarah Walker from Clarice. So if you could take the stand, we'll put your question up and the original answer before your opportunity for a supplementary. Sarah, would you like to ask a question?
Yes,
I
thank
should call
you.
Mrs. Walker. Sorry, been rude.
It's all right.
Sorry, didn't mean to be.
So the question is in relation to the Borough Museum, as you've seen, and the petition of 1,100 signatures. And I'd like to thank Councillor Reynolds for his reply. I'd also like to thank Jack Rankin, parliamentary candidate, for his valued support with this petition.
Is he in Warwick?
No, he's in Windsor. In fact, well, do you normally heckle and laugh at resident questions?
Point of order, please, Mr. Mayor.
I'll continue. Thank you.
The question's supposed to be related to the
It
original.
is completely related. So I find it, I also wanted to thank other councillors here in the chamber from across political groups who have supported the campaign. It's disappointing that this petition is not acknowledged in the answer given, when the most significant proportion of responses have come from residents in this borough and surrounding areas. I'm unclear why you referred to 23-24 budget. Are we not considering the 24-25 budget tonight? And is this surely your budget decision for this coming year, not last? It's disappointing that after several months and at a budget meeting, you're not actually able to share detailed proposals, cost impacts and options, particularly when this was a top issue with residents in the budget consultation. Do you?
That's 2 minutes, I'm afraid. So,
well, I think I was
Councillor Reynolds,
interrupted.
if you'd respond, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Nice to meet you in person instead of on Facebook. So nice to see you. I can't obviously talk about the petition you referenced because I haven't seen it. I haven't been given it. It's not been submitted. But as I said in my original written response, the official Royal Borough Windsor Maidenhead petition has just over 70 signatures. And we are keenly open to work with the Friends of the Windsor and Royal Borough Museum group, which we're speaking to on a regular basis. I think the chairman attended the cabinet meeting that we had a few weeks ago. And if you're not already a member of the group, I really would encourage you to join that group to be able to have your say and work with the group to really help make the Windsor Museum what we all want it to be.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. The next question is also from Mrs. Walker. I'd be polite up and proper. Can we have the original question up and the response to this? And the written response. Mrs. Walker, would you like to ask your supplementary question, please?
Yes, thank you.
And that
thank
is
you.
again to Councillor Hill.
Yes, thank you to Councillor Hill for the response. My question actually related to the economic impact of such significant parking charges, not the equality impact in the answer. So are residents to assume that not only did you raise the parking charges after 75% of respondents disagreed, but that there was no economic consideration taken onto the damage of our towns, of people visiting elsewhere, of people staying shorter periods of time as a result of these increases? You also haven't answered why the charges were increased before the results of the consultation were even shared. And even the carefully worded press release didn't contain a link to the consultation results. Is this transparent? Instead of a budget for residents of further costs, cuts and council tax hikes, why are we not seeing more income generation ideas, greater efficiencies of operations and contracts managed more effectively? Why weren't residents promised parking reductions from this administration prior to election, particularly in Windsor?
Thank you. Councillor Hill.
Much, Mr. Mayor. That sounds like a speech rather than a question. Coming to the economic impact, I'll just draw Sarah Walker's attention to what happened when the Conservatives removed the Advantage card discount some years ago, and we'll see that. Am I answering this question or is somebody else?
One person talking. Thank you.
I'm going to answer the question about economic impact, if I may, Councillor Hunt. we'll see that Victoria Street charges went up by 300%, River Street charges went up by 200%. That's just two examples. If we go to Alma Road, we're on 180%, Alexander Gardens 180%. Windsor's being clobbered, by the way. Interesting that. We should take that back to Jack Rankin on his campaign. By contrast, in comparison, we've put charges up a modest 10, 12 to 17%. And yes, we did consider the economic impact, and we have looked at ways of taking more money out of the cost overhead in the borough. In fact, I believe, and Councillor Jones will correct me if I'm wrong, and she'll shout at me, I think we're taking 7 million out of the cost base this year. The cold hard fact is the Conservatives left such a dire economic situation that we've had to make up the difference with fees and charges. And it goes further than just this borough and the previous Conservative administration. It goes to the heart of government. We can only raise council tax legally by 4.99%. If you care to look across the country, read the press reports in the paper, literally dozens upon dozens of local authorities are facing bankruptcy. And this is one of them that's having to work hard to keep away from it. And it's the fault of the Conservative administration. If we could increase council tax by the necessary amount, we wouldn't be talking about parking charges, would we? And the Conservative government has held that line for years. So, not anymore, Maureen. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. We also have now Ian Haggart, I believe, who has a couple of questions here. First to Councillor Jones, and we will, as usual, put up the original question and the response. This is a big response, so it is available online. We're not going to go through it line by line because it's a lot of statistical information in there, Ian, I'm sure you can appreciate. But you're free to ask your supplementary question.
On there, lots of information on there. To keep this supplementary question quite straightforward, may I ask which of the 15 Sitford neighbour councils spend the same or less as the Royal Borough spends, and in terms of population, please?
Councillor Jones.
Because I answered the question that you've proposed. What exactly are you now asking?
Trying to understand if any of the neighbouring councils on the list, the 15 list, spend less per head or similar to this council.
Less per head. Okay, obviously I won't have that information at my hand. So
I will try and help. Thank you very much. I will try and help you. 3 of those do. So despite the difficult challenges all boroughs.
No, but that's not. I haven't got it at hand. I will let you know that answer, and it will be on there.
Could you will provide a...
I will provide a written answer.
Thank you very much. The next question is again from Ian Haggart, Cleveland Deadwood East, and original question.
It's the same response as for the previous.
And the answer was effectively the one that was given earlier about the Ferris wheel finances. But do you have a question for
Thank
Councillor
you for the response, Councillor
In fact, no,
Reynolds.
this is Councillor Reynolds, is it?
On there. The approved plans for the Ferris wheel do not include any information for anyone to budget for the power and the light illumination in the very sensitive River Thames corridor. So may I ask, what is the lighting intensity and the power consumption and the budgeted amount to know what is going to come out of the £40,000 that you've put into the budget for this year?
Thank you for your supplementary question and the original question. I think in reality, the answer to my question has got to be very similar to what I gave you in my first question. No contract has been signed, and therefore we haven't got, as a local authority, the specifics of the amount of energy it will generate, because we haven't decided. We haven't signed that contract with people to say this is what it's going to be and this is what it's not going to be. I will only reiterate that this is an example of, and the figure in the budget is an example of this new administration being prudent in the way it does our figures. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. We would much rather have a smaller figure in the budget and deliver above that, so we're not chasing our tail. We know what happened with fake budgets that were included last year, and this administration is determined to not do them again, and we haven't done them here.
Thank you, Mr. Haggart. The next question is via Zoom. I believe we have Andrew Hill. If we have the original question. And the answer. This is obviously financed with Councillor Jones. So, Mr. Hill, if you've got a supplementary question you'd like to add.
Yes, I do. Thank you. The point of this question was to suggest an alternative to relentless service cuts. I asked you to look at all the Treasury advisors, surveyors, lawyers and auditors who were supposed to protect residents but didn't. SIPFA, for example, said the leisure centre contract had no proper business case. Councillor Coe described the one-sided golf club contract rightly as reckless. But your answer tonight implies that the advice of professional lawyers, surveyors and advisors was impeccable throughout, and you choose instead to blame only voting councillors. Why are you cutting our services, like the out-of-hours environmental health team, rather than challenging these advisors? Don't you agree that they should have warned us that racking up £200 million of unfunded debt without any way of paying off all of that debt was a recipe for certain financial disaster? They took their fees, they kept silent, so why punish residents rather than holding the so-called professionals to account first? Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. It is officers' decision-making, along with councillors, that set the policies of the council. The auditors come in and they sample check transactions. They can warn, they can't stop. It is a decision for council and council's officers as to when they borrow and whether they decide, whether they believe there is a plan of paying it back. The fact that there wasn't a plan to pay it back, or the plan didn't happen, is down to the people that borrowed, made that decision to borrow the money, and really no one else.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We move on now to a welcome return to the council chamber, Mr. Shay Buckman.
Sorry, we've got a second question from Mr.
Oh,
Hill.
I do apologise. I went swiftly on, too swiftly. We have a second very long question from Mr. Hill. But you're all excited there, Shay. Calm down. We're back to GA.
So we're on I.
There.
Am I on to the one?
There you go. And there's a very, very, very long response to this, Mr. Hill. So I don't think you'll mind that we've actually placed it online rather than on the screen now. But you're free to ask your supplementary question. Off you go.
Thank you. Officers informed you that the hidden golf needs assessment remained in draft for almost 7 years. But I've shown you the unpublished document and it clearly says final issue September 2019. When the statutory consultee, Sport England, was shown a copy of this document in 2019, they rejected the golf needs assessment, saying it was unsound and therefore it didn't justify the loss of the golf club. RBWM's response was to bury their objection. It was never published, nor was it shown by RBWM to the BLP inspector or even to the High Court. Councillor Bermange, do you agree with me that hiding the statutory objection to the loss of the golf club was utterly wrong? And will you now seriously discuss with Councillor Werner the opportunity to return the £9,000 costs claimed from residents who had every right to see Sports England's material objection? Thank you.
Councillor Burbage.
Thank you. I almost got away with it, Mr. Mayor, but anyhow, I'm back here. But thank you very much, Andrew, for your question, and thank you for sharing other documents with me. I think it's given me additional context, which is really helpful, actually, in my own investigations into this. What I would say, and it's something I said in the original answer, all these activities, of course, happened under the previous administration, and we're going to be talking later on tonight and focusing on the budget and talking about financial governance. We've in the short period we've been here and in administration, we have found numerous accounts of very questionable financial governance, and I think governance issues go far beyond that. This is one case where I think there are questions to ask. Obviously, the questions the people I want to be asking them to are ultimately the previous members, the previous administration. It's ultimately the tone from the top that sets how these things work and where pressure is coming from. And I'm actually, I'm a sort of as appalled as you at the way these things are managed. You asked a very specific question. I can't give you an answer in terms of what is effectively a question about a court order, but I do give a commitment that I will be speaking again with Councillor Werner on this very serious issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burbage. We are pushing towards the end of the 30 minutes, but I'm going to carry on because obviously there's a couple of good questions here. Shay, I'm very sorry for sending you a full start there earlier, but it's lovely to see you back, able to ask questions instead of writing notes about it all. So we have your original question and the answer. If you have a supplementary question, please, for Councillor Werner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your response, Councillor Werner, particularly the very direct first sentence, which, given my profession, is always refreshing to see. But I ask this question for clarity, as I know there are strong views on all sides in relation to the golf course, and still lots of uncertainty with the planning application now live. In your response, Councillor Werner, you state if we cannot stop it, you state if we cannot stop it, suggesting that the hope from this council is that the golf course development can be halted. Yet here we are tonight, where councillors will be asked to put their names to a budget which claims the sale of the golf course is vital, meaning absolutely necessary or essential. It almost seems contradictory to me when the budget paper and the finances effectively suggest that this sale must happen in order for the council to reduce its debt. So my question is, leaving aside the efforts to limit the environmental impact and focusing solely on the efforts to stop the development in its entirety, what is the logic behind the council trying to prevent something which, if this paper is approved, it also deems to be vital? Thank you.
Councillor Werner.
Thank you very much. As you know,
press the button.
Okay, work that time. As you know, I opposed the sale of this land since it was first put forward by the Conservatives as borough local plan. It is and always has been an appalling suggestion. I notice that the Conservatives are still promoting the scheme and are actually suggesting that far more of the open space that is left should be built on. The worry is that if they did manage to get back into power in 2027, then even more of the Great Park will end up being built on. The sale of the land under the previous administration contract would not even start paying off any of the debt until 2029, and most not until the late 2030s. So we have many years before it will actually benefit the council. You probably heard the 500 million figure that was quoted by various people. It's a fiction. It's a made-up figure that was not based on any survey, but merely picked out from a feverish mind. It was a myth, a legend, a fantasy. Thank you.
Very good, but can I remind you all it's a debate, it's not an entertainment programme. Okay. Next question is also from Shay Bottomley, Welfare Ward, asking a question of Councillor Reynolds. First question was, and the written response. If you have a supplementary question, Shay, be free to ask it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your response, Councillor Reynolds. I'll keep it short. In the event that the affected groups strongly oppose the proposed increases, what alternative solutions or compromises are being considered to address their concerns while still achieving the financial goals outlined in the budget?
Councillor Reynolds.
Okay. I think, to be honest, that's a very difficult question to answer, given that I can't predict what they're going to say, and therefore I can't predict what we will do after they've said what they haven't yet said. I think we took the decision that we weren't happy with how the consultation was done. We're fixing that problem. We've said we're not happy, we're going to fix it, we're going to do it better this time. And I'm happy to share that consultation letter with you so you can see that as well, because I know you're very interested in the subject. We're going to see all the responses. Once I've got all those responses back, I'll sit down with the executive director and we will make a decision which is in the best interest of everybody. But like I said in my letter to the groups, it's really important that we strike that right balance between making sure the council is financially sustainable and promoting sport and leisure within our borough. And it's something we're really keen on. And I'm more than happy, as we've exchanged on social media, to work with you to see what we can do to help make this happen better. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay. And I think we'd all like to thank the members of the public for those well-considered questions this evening. It's what it's for. I do hope you stick around for the exciting bits that are coming up next, as they say. Agenda item 7 is the next item, which is the council tax 2024-25. I'll remind you all that. Sorry.
I just sort of sitting here, I realised that I meant when I gave my response to declare an interest in that I supported Mr. Hill during his legal challenge, and given that it was something that he mentioned, he was clearly referring to there, I felt sort of not at ease. Not the fact that I hadn't declared that. So I just want to point out that would it be in order for that to be minuted? Thank you.
Proceeding then, agenda item 7, council tax 2024-25. I remind you all that this isn't the budget debate at the moment. This is the separate paper, the budget, the council tax setting. So therefore, it is the normal rules of debate with 5 and 5, etc. going ahead. Councillor Jones, would you like to introduce this item?
Mr. Mayor, this report seeks agreement to the proposed council tax charge for 24-25. It also sets out proposed charges by other precepting bodies, including the police and fire authorities and individual parishes. Approximately 85% of funding for the council is from council tax paid by residents, and the council is projecting a collection rate of 98.5%. The overall council tax requirement has been calculated at 89.559 million for the 24-25 financial year, and the government has retained the referendum limit, the cap, for unitary councils at 2.99% plus the 2% adult social care precept, a total of 4.99%. This equates to a Band D charge for 24-25 of £1,284.14, which in turn equates to an increase of £61.03, or 4.99%. A legislation charge now permits billing authorities in England to impose an empty dwellings premium after 1 year instead of 2. The council intends to apply such a change from 1st of April 24. At present, English billing authorities may only impose an empty dwellings premium on properties that are unoccupied and substantially unfurnished. This does not cover occupied furnished homes. The new legislation will permit billing authorities to apply a premium to properties' second homes. If the recommendations are accepted by council, a premium of 100%, making a total council tax charge of 200%, will be levied. This legislation requires the decision to be made 12 months before implementation. Therefore, should it be agreed, it will come into force in April of next year. The recommendations as set out are to approve the council tax calculations, note the precepts of partner organisations, reduce the time period for long-term empty premium on properties, and introduce a new council tax premium on second homes from April 2025. And I commend the report to council.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder of that proposal? Councillor Werner, do you wish to speak now or? No? Yep. Perfect. Sorry, Michelle, to that.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a question about the increase in the precept for Windsor. So what has been proposed? Can you justify that, explain why that's being increased, what the areas of increase are, why that's happened? And in relation to Windsor, I mean, it's really disappointing that we haven't had a chance to discuss parking rate, but we'll discuss that, I suppose, in the next section, because that's been foisted upon people in Windsor, which is really unacceptable. But yeah, if we can stick to why is this increasing? What are the areas that it's increasing in, and how can you demonstrate that people in Windsor are getting value for money?
Councillor Ashgar-Majid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we have a long night ahead of us. We have many residents here as well, so I will be very brief. I will actually be abstaining from voting for a council tax rise, as I believe that there are further savings that could have been made, savings that can be made without affecting the services which our officers offer to our residents. I'm happy to discuss this outside the meeting, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Burmage.
I'll be extremely brief. I just wanted to point out, in particular, my support for the fact that we are proposing not to make any amendments to the council tax reduction scheme this year. That this forms part of this paper, and that's something that I know has been looked at and indeed has been acted upon in previous years, so that we've actually seen, as well as the maximum council tax being levied in previous years, we've also seen less generous council tax reduction schemes, which are there to support our most vulnerable and economically deprived residents. So I do want to make that point. I'm also very keen to hear what when we get to the main debate, some of Councillor Majid's additional savings. I'm sure we certainly wait to hear about those. That'd be very interesting. But thank you.
If there are no other points, Councillor Jones, I think you were. Oh, sorry, missed you there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I must admit, I'm rather surprised by the comments from the Conservative side. After all, the Conservatives actually voted for a 5% rise in this budget last year. There's a thing called the medium-term financial plan. I have a copy of it to hand. That actually all the Conservative councillors voted for last year. And now in that medium-term financial plan, it clearly says that the council is going to be increasing council tax this year by 5%. Well, to be precise, 4.99%. Your colleagues there, they all voted in favour of it. Some of you actually spoke in favour of that. And now in some kind of amnesia, you're denying it ever happened. you know, we're really trying to run a partnership council here where we all work together to save the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead from bankruptcy. I thought the Conservatives were part of that. It is so sad to see that instead they're denying the past, not owning up to their mistakes, and worse, even forgetting how they voted at the last budget meeting. Very disappointing. Thank you.
I think in all fairness, Councillor Majid wasn't a part of the last council, so I think it's a pretty unfair thing to throw there. Are you happy with that as a correction? So, was that your 5-minute summing up there, please? Okay, nice. And I was going to go to some rights of reply to Councillor Jones, but you leapt all over it there. But Councillor Jones, if you'd like to address any points made and sum up, please.
If I've heard correctly, because there's quite a bit in some of that, there was something around the parish costs in Windsor, I believe. I mean, I could give a fuller answer at another time, but my belief is that the parish precept for unparished areas, which Windsor is calculated as an average of all other parishes. And I believe, and you know, officers can correct me after the meeting, but I believe that special expenses was raised by about 2.99% to cover increased costs of parks and street lights. But that is, you know, obviously I haven't got that detail of the budget here, but I can provide the detail going forward. And I do agree with Councillor Werner. Last year's budget made it very, very clear that this council was not viable financially unless the council tax went up by the maximum allowed. And that is what we were told. It would be very wrong of us to now put the council into an unviable position by not following the medium-term financial plan as it was set out then. Thank you.
If you can just excuse us for a moment while we just check on something. Okay, that debate now being closed, what we need to do is obviously go to the vote. We need to have a recorded vote on this by nature of the proposition that's put forward. To remind you that the recommendations are in the sheet, and it's to note the report and approve the calculations to determine the council tax requirement for 2024-25 as set out in Appendix A, consisting of the council tax requirement of £89.559 million, a Band D charge of £1,284.14 for the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead in 24-25, reflecting an overall increase of 4.99 based on a 2.99 increase in base council tax, taking the charge to £1,097.30 for 24-25, an additional 2% to reflect an increase in the adult social care precept. And the special expenses precept increased by £1.06, 2.98% to 36.66 for the next year for the unparished areas of Windsor and Maidenhead in accordance with Section 35 of the Local Government Finance Act. And to note the following precepts that are in the motion itself. I remind Councillor Coe, you left the room before the debate had ended, so you will have to abstain from this vote. So carry on with the name vote, please, Kirsty.
Thank you, councillors. I've opened up the microphone, so if I could just ask in turn, if you could indicate for me, please, as read out by the Mayor, if you ask for, against or abstain. Councillor Baskerville. For. Councillor Burnage. For. Councillor Blundell. For. Councillor Bond. For. Councillor Bra. For. Councillor Buckley. For. Councillor Del Campo. For. Councillor Carpenter. For. Councillor Carol da Costa. For. Councillor Wisdom da Costa. For. Councillor Cross. For. Councillor D Davies. For. Councillor Karen Davies. Councillor Douglas. Councillor Gosling. Councillor Grove. Councillor Hill. Councillor Howard. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jones. Councillor Knowles. Councillor Larkham. Councillor Luxton. Councillor Majid. Thank you. Councillor Martin. Councillor Moriarty. Councillor Price. Councillor Reeves. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Sharp. Councillor Shaw. Councillor G. Singh. Councillor Story. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Amy Teasey. Councillor Julian Teasey. Councillor Walters. Councillor Werner.
The result of that was 31 for the council tax setting and 8 abstentions. Therefore, that motion is carried. Agenda item number 8. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can I just confirm, are you counting Councillor Coe as an abstention?
You have him down as abstention?
So his vote wasn't called for?
No.
Rather than an abstention, he wasn't actually here, so we can't vote.
Oh, apologies. No, absolutely. It's 7 abstentions. I do apologise. Thank you.
Okay. Good call. Agenda item number 8 now, which is the budget for 2024-25, which has been referred by Cabinet. Once this motion has been moved and seconded, I will ask the opposition spokesman to address the meeting. Following this, all other members will be able to speak. So you know, the proposer and the opposition response both have 10 minutes, whereas everybody else has 5 minutes. Councillor Jones, I invite you to introduce the item. As this is the budget, you are the proposer and you have 10 minutes.
Many thanks, Mr. Mayor. The papers before you, the main paper and the 16 appendices, detail proposals to set a balanced budget for the financial year 24-25 and the medium-term financial strategy through to 28-29. There are 14 recommendations on page 32 of the agenda for members to approve. This budget will support the vision and aims of the new corporate plan, kick-starting the true transformation of services that will ensure the viability of this council. Many councils across the country are setting budgets in a challenging environment of increases in social care, demand and costs, interest rates and contract costs. Frustratingly, this council also has to deal with the legacy decisions around council tax and capital spend that have had long-lasting effect on our spending power. This council has £322 per resident less to spend on services than the average of comparable councils. And we can see the impact that has had on increases in fees and charges to support the provision of services. Decisions have had to be made to keep the council financially viable when faced with previous year's unbudgeted statutory costs and a lack of promised capital receipts. The outgoing S151 officer warned last February that given the levels of savings identified, the council needs to assure itself that there are robust plans and processes to deliver and report on the delivery of savings during 23-24. My response was a concern that continual non-achievable savings plans were being presented by the previous administration. This has been proven to be correct, as the statutory costs, the costs we have no choice but to incur, were under budgeted, and this has reduced our reserves by half in the last year. This year, we had to take a different approach. It is usual to amend the previous year's budget to apply growth in demand and costs and reductions in costs and efficiency savings. Given our lack of belief in last year's assumptions and modelling, we started from the bottom up and calculated current demands, current costs, current income, looked at trends, strengthened the confidence in the numbers used, and addressed any issues we have found whenever and however they came about. Plans are in place to provide growth of nearly 10 million and savings of 7.5 million. And unlike the budget approved last February, there is appropriate resources to achieve these targets. And improved procedures will ensure that there is the capability to monitor the budget. We are investing just under 50 million into adult social care and health, including supporting our vulnerable residents as they leave hospital to reduce the risk of care home placements and addressing the very real issues around recruitment and retention of permanent staff. Nearly 30 million into children's services, prioritising our family hubs. 7.5 million on highways, paths, bridges and street lighting, acknowledging the impact these areas have on public safety. And just over 1 million in additional officer posts to ensure effective services, adherence to legislation, cost saving and project deliverance. We are very aware of the cost of living crisis and have retained our council tax reduction scheme and now have 2 financial inclusion officers that can support our poorest and just managing residents. The Here to Help service that brings together the areas of financial support available is an excellent resource for our residents. Officers and councillors continue to work with our voluntary organisations to support residents across the borough. In 2019, the lead member for finance stated that the council could choose to be debt-free, including the pension deficit, in the medium-term future. This has not happened. In fact, there has been no reduction in the 200 million debt in the last 4 years, and no receipt expected in the next 4 years to reduce the debt. The cost of this borrowing is estimated to reach £13 million this year. That's 11% of our budget we cannot spend on services. How did they get it so wrong? Or was it just wishful thinking? In both this year's revenue budget and the MTFS, officers have made assumptions based on trend analysis and using best information available going forward. Given our estimated low reserves, we have increased the contingency budget from 2.4 million last year to 3.6 million, and the intent is to add any unused contingency to reserves in April 2025. The capital receipts expected from large-scale projects will help us to reduce our capital financing requirement or our debt, but based on historical agreements, the income from these will not be realised within the next 4 years and are impacted by the amount of interest we are paying until those receipts are received. Appendix D, E, F and H identify growth, efficiencies, fees and charges and capital spend. The most notable growth being the 5.2 million in adult social care and 2.6 million in children's social care to address the inadequacies in the 23-24 budget. In the last decade, social care has increased from being 54% of our net revenue expenditure to 77%, greatly impacting other services. But we are also seeing increased funding in other areas. We are spending 130,000 for tree inspection and maintenance, 2.5 million to cut carbon emissions and save money on energy consumption, 1 million on provision improvement for special educational needs, 300,000 investment in our asset portfolio so that we can attract improved rental, 200,000 investment in transforming the health suite at Windsor Leisure Centre, and 310,000 of funding for identified remedial works to Braywick Leisure Centre, although I wish we didn't have to do that, none of which will incur borrowing. Capital spend is being restricted to the necessary infrastructure funded by external grant and therefore reduces the need for borrowing. We are ensuring that we prioritise any schemes coming forward that deliver a healthy return. The Treasury strategy highlights the importance of our cash flows, borrowing and investments. Large amounts of unfunded borrowing have left the authority with around 200 million of debt. We are continuing to enhance our processes to produce better quality forecasts to inform management decisions going forward, and support is already in place to strengthen both capacity and capability. There were some recommendations from corporate scrutiny that have been considered by Cabinet, and feedback was given at Cabinet last week. The Chief Financial Officer set out the risks and mitigations within a very transparent and compelling report found at Appendix O. There are legacy decisions we have to live with far-reaching consequences, but we are still viable, and this budget is the first step on the way to return the Council to financial sustainability. With the enormous effort of officers and members in a very challenging situation, and despite last year's budget being inadequate, we have delivered a balanced budget. We are delivering services at a much lower cost than other councils, but the actions set out in this budget and already in progress, the transformation programme, the capital project management, the increased financial governance, putting back those processes that have disappeared over the years, the increase in capacity, and the focus on income generation will all need to be successful to ensure delivery of this budget. We were asked at Cabinet why we were not issuing a Section 114, a statement that we would not be able to cover our future costs. And wouldn't it be politically prudent to do so? Well, this is a good question, but the responsibility lies with our Chief Financial Officer, not elected members. The professional opinion of our CFO is that there is a plan for a balanced budget, a small reserve, a good contingency built into the budget, and a medium-term plan with surpluses being generated. Therefore, government, following a review of our situation, could refuse us on the basis that we are still financially viable. In my view, it would damage our reputation and credibility. We are not in a Section 114 situation at this time. This is not a time to be political, but to make the right decisions for the benefit of this council and our residents. The borough finances are challenging and have taken a serious knock following the undeliverable budget set in February. This has necessitated officers and members taking very difficult decisions that we would rather not take. The finances are on a knife edge, but with thanks to our Chief Financial Officer and her team, our senior leadership team, lead members, scrutiny panels, and officers across the council, we have challenging but balanced and deliverable budget. I commend this budget to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do we have a seconder?
I would like to second, I think I get to speak up.
Speak again. Okay. To apply for the opposition, Councillor Julian Sharp, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to give thanks to the officers for all their hard work in preparing the budget. It's really good to know that our professional finance team have been able to guide and assist the administration. So thank you very much indeed for that. The headline news here is that 12 months ago, a budget was prepared that had over £10 million in reserve for this council. The Conservative administration at the time left the council with money in reserve and a sensible balanced budget. We now see what a pickle this administration has got itself into. After 10 months in charge, this new administration is now admitting that over £6 million of reserves has been spent. Not only this, but they've also destroyed the other surpluses that had recently been built up very carefully over previous years. Please would someone tell my residents how this represents good financial management of their money? I have to say that really, this is a shambles. For an administration that has been so keen to tell us what big ideas they had for the council, this budget is really, unfortunately, lacking in ambition. And it's a sad reflection of the current administration that that is the case. We have a situation where we're spending more and charging, more importantly, charging our residents more. And now we're saying that, they're saying that really they want to charge our families as much as they can for fees, with fees and charges rising massively. We all know that running a council here can be very difficult at times, and it does need a plan, which really does seem to be sadly lacking still after nearly a year. And there are several examples of this. This really is, unfortunately, I have to say, a shambles. But let me move on. Now, we know that to our residents, the climate issue is really important. And we're all very aware of how keen people in the current administration were to declare a climate emergency. Well, now this very same team is running the council, and we would all have thought that one of their main missions would be the green agenda. So now, so how do you push the green agenda forward in the borough? Well, I was pleased to kickstart the solar panel initiative here in the borough under the previous administration. That seems to have worked pretty well. And in addition to that, the previous administration also gave a laudable free parking allowance to all electric vehicles in borough car parks. So to enhance the green agenda, what have we seen from this administration? Well, as you may have noticed, if you drive an electric vehicle, they've abolished the free parking for these vehicles. A great way to show your green credentials, I have to say. Top marks to the climate emergency, which members were so keen on in opposition. So we really have a case here of the not so green agenda. And whilst I'm on the subject of parking, this administration, you may have noticed, and prior to the budget and without consultation, has put up parking charges. And the rise in these charges, I have to say, is enormous for many, many residents, especially during the cost of living crisis. And I'm sure that all the businesses in Maidenhead and Windsor will all welcome the support that this administration is giving them with the increased parking charges. I wonder, I heard Councillor Hill earlier on, and I wonder really how much consideration was given to the lifeblood of our town centres, because I just can't see that very much consideration was given to that at all. And it means that all our residents suffer and we go into a spiral of decline, which is really sad for Windsor, Maidenhead, and everywhere else in the area. This, I'm sorry to say, is another shambles. Now, let me move on to another subject. If you'd read the budget papers, you will have seen, you will have seen that a public consultation was done on the budget. Well, that showed, didn't it, really how popular the budget is with residents. In this area, we have approximately 150,000 people, and woohoo, 200 of them were in support of these proposals. That is a phenomenal achievement. Even our residents recognise that this is a shambles. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move on again. Community infrastructure levy. We happily refer to this as SIL. It makes it far easier to say and easier to forget what it is. This is supposed to be paid out to compensate communities for the additional housing burden in their areas and to provide the necessary infrastructure required by residents in that area, whether it's schools, roads, whatever it might be, to make that area livable in. Well, let's look at what's happening with this, shall we? In Maidenhead, it was decided not to levy SIL. Therefore, most SIL that's raised where new houses are being built.
Can I just hold you there? Can you please respect the prepared person speaking, please, and not make silly gestures? Thank you.
Most SIL that is raised where we're building houses currently. That's in Ascot and the Sunnings, where we're undergoing a complete change in our community. And it's an unbelievable change that we will have over the next several years. To date, most of the SIL raised in the south of the borough has actually been spent in Maidenhead. And more non-Ascot based projects are in this budget benefiting from SIL raised in the south of the borough. Believe me, my residents are furious, absolutely furious with this council and the distribution of funds that they are seeing. I have to say, and I'm sorry to say it, this is a shambles. And now for something slightly different. This administration is currently, and shockingly, with the cash crisis which you are telling us you are experiencing at the moment, spending residents' money on changing the livery on local taxis. I really ask residents how important they think this is in their list of priorities. This is a total waste of valuable funds that could be spent elsewhere by this administration, and it may not be very much, but it's an example. It's another case of where our residents are being shortchanged. At the same time, in Ascot, I'm being told that there is no money for a very inexpensive scheme to alleviate some really importantly needed local traffic issues. It's another shambles. So we have a council with no plan and an administration that has failed to get a grip of the situation. I agree that this is a very challenging situation, as it has been for many other councils across the country this year. Fellow councillors, I am afraid that this administration...
Councillor Sharp, that's well over the 10 minutes there, so if you could just... Last line.
Am I allowed to finish?
Last line.
I'll be brief. We all know that there are areas of huge spending across this borough, and these need to be managed very carefully to ensure the safety and security of our...
Councillor Sharp, that's more than just one line finishing sentence, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we open up the rest of the debate, can I remind each councillor has 5 minutes to speak to make their points. Please, can we listen to the debate and not keep repeating the same things ad infinitum? Do you want to speak now or at the end? Are you speaking at the end? Okay. And the First councillor on the list to speak is Councillor Samuel Werner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by saying this really isn't the budget that I wanted to be supporting as leader of the council, my first budget. I knew the finances were in a mess, but I had no idea quite how fake the last Conservative budget was. I did say before the election that it would take 2 terms to really turn the borough around and achieve all the things we want to achieve. It now looks like the first part of those 8 years is just trying to fix the mess we were left in. I'd like to pay tribute at this point to both the councillors and the officers and the collegiate approach that has taken, where the Liberal Democrats, independents and officers have all come together to sort out this mess. It's a real tribute to partnership working. There are always things we are going to have to do that we don't like to save the finances from the fake budget last year and the longer term inherited problems. And across the council chamber, most members have approached it all sensibly, raising concerns, but also seeing the bigger picture that bankruptcy could be around the corner if we take no action. For at least the last 5 years, I've repeated at each budget meeting a mantra of what should be done to fix the finances. Each year I was ignored. So you can imagine my satisfaction actually being able to make it happen finally. So to go through the mantra again, insourcing. Do you remember when I used to talk about this? Across adult services, leisure, highways, we've started the process of taking back in-house where it makes sense. This is giving the council control, better value for money, and better services for residents. So that has to be a big tick. Making better use of assets and not just selling them off to benefit developers. Where we can, we are looking at ways to bring the council assets back into use. Investigating a new life for our buildings, for example, the Sportstable building and the Kiddles Pavilion, and putting an end to the fire sale of assets. Remember that atrocious decision on the old Magnet Leisure Centre site? What had been 30 million suddenly fell to 12 million. So asset use, yes, another big tick. Commercialisation, or making better use of our skills. You may have noticed that we have started to run the CCTV control room for the Bracknell bid. We have a gold standard CCTV control operation, and selling its services brings in a good revenue, the first of many such schemes. I remember back in 2017 when I managed to save the borough's CCTV cameras from being switched off by the Conservatives. Oh, the vitriol that was heaped on my head, but thank goodness I did, because now we're making an income from it. Another big tick. New contract management and better procurement. Over the years, the Conservatives took so much out of procurement and contract management that there was barely anyone left to do it. It was a complete mess, another mess for us to fix. In many cases, they actually handed the contract management over to the contractor, leaving them effectively to mark their own homework. This budget has started to change that, with expanding our procurement team so they can actually do the job, and a focus on contract management so we can hold the contractors to account when they get it wrong. Again, another big tip. My worry is that even this won't be enough. Every time we think we've uncovered all the mess, we pick up another stone and find a whole other mess that needs to be resolved. The amount of rents collected last year bearing no resemblance to your budget. A paper-based system for debt collection that's left 5 million in debt uncollected, some for 10 years. And most of all, the fake transformation programme. This year, the transformation is based on reality. The services have proposed and agreed them, have planned their delivery, have the resource they request to implement them, the right ideas, the right resource, the right framework, and the right engagement. We're certainly not there yet. Last year, we introduced a financial recovery plan for survival, and this is the next vital step on the way to recovering the finances. So for those new councillors here, and there are quite a few on the Lib Dem and Independent side, every year I name the budget. It's a sort of summary of the budget. Under the Tories, we had the Titanic budget, the Gamblers budget, and last year, again, we were proved right when we called it the fantasy budget. This year, I was thinking about what it should be. The budget has really been about fixing the mess. but the fixing the mess budget doesn't quite sound the same. So I think this year can be called the Phoenix budget, with the council phoenix rising out of the ashes of 16 years of Tory slash and burn. So I'm happy to commend to you the Phoenix buddy. Please join us to rise out of the ashes. Thank you.
5 minutes. And as I said, the debate is now open to the floor. Councillor Calder-Costa.
I was very encouraged to hear that we are looking at insourcing again, because one of the biggest issues when I looked at some of the supplementary papers was that we had not accounted for the amount that adult social care would cost. And I do believe that bringing that in-house will make a saving, but also if we produce a good enough product, we can sell that out to our neighbouring councils and make an income, because that's what we need to do. When we've got our budgets the way it is, we need to find ways of generating income. When there's no more fat to cut, you have to make more money. The other thing that I'm very, very pleased to see is that you have not affected the council tax support. I work with very many people in financial need, and to have to pay any more than they already do would be absolutely devastating for them. And for you and me to pay maybe a couple of £100 a year extra council tax means nothing to our overall budget. But for somebody who has to pay even £5 a month more, it can make the difference between having enough electric to cook the food that they get from the food bank to feed their children. If this was a budget presented as it is now, in any other circumstances, I don't think I would be happy to support it. But we are in exceptional days and exceptional times, and we have uncovered things that we suspected, those of us that were councillors in years gone by, that we suspected but could not prove. Now we've seen those things being exposed. I feel that depending on what happens with the rest of the debate, I may be forced to support a budget that normally I never would. Thank you.
Next is Councillor Wissam de Costa.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank, as others have, officers and lead members as well, because you put a lot of hard work, effort and soul into a very difficult situation at a difficult time. You've had to look at invidious ethical and moral situations when you're looking at where are you going to cut these costs? We have to cut. Where are you going to cut them? So thank you for doing that for us. And people have said this is all because of the dire financial flaws due to previous administrations. Now, I want to say two things. The first lot is on behalf of residents, and the second half is in relation to me as a governance and finance professional. So on behalf of residents, Windsor residents, we're really not happy about the horrific parking rates in Windsor. And it's not just residents, it's businesses. Businesses are coming to me and saying to me, we're losing business. Money's going out of Windsor. It's going to Bracknell and other places. So the consequence of that is that Windsor is going downhill continually because of money or because of the high parking rates, just as one example. So we have to look at that. We must look at that again. The second point is on the Windsor Museum. Residents again are telling me we must have it, we must keep it. So I really want a confirmation that the Windsor Museum will stay open as it is, and then we can look at in years to come what we can do about improving the situation. So that's on behalf of residents. Now, on behalf of everybody with my governance and finance hat on, I have to say that there is an amount of obscurity and a lack of transparency which really hampers governance with the budget papers as presented. There's a lack of detail in the budget, so I have no way of knowing. For example, there's one line in the budget which has got infrastructure, sustainability and transport. Well, that's a big budget line on its own. So I want to see that broken down into highways, buses, street cleaning, refuse collection, waste disposal, net zero biodiversity. You can't lump it all into one heading and not give us the detail and expect us to really be able to scrutinise this effectively. Other aspects in terms of the lack of transparency are that there's no balance sheet to consider, especially on the long-term debt with the medium-term financial forecast. No worst case scenarios looked at. What happens if we suddenly have a a hit on fuel prices again, what's going to happen to the likelihood of our reserves being adequate? And really that comes back to the reserves then. And just in case of the reserves, we don't have enough information to look at this and consider whether everything has been included, whether we would have a different view, and therefore whether it's too low. The fundamental issue with reserves is that what you're doing is that you're not recognizing issues. You're either hiding your head in the sand, which is a concern, or what we're doing is saying we're going to have cuts in the future. That's the implication of not showing us the reserves to actually scrutinize effectively. So who's going to suffer? Well, who is suffering? And I understand that this is not down to the current administration, it's down to decisions from the past. It's going to be the vulnerable adults, the senior citizens, vulnerable young people in their formative years who could have their lives blighted for the future if we keep on cutting. And of course, our RBWM staff who are overworked, underpaid, and in many ways undercared for. So what I see is missing here is the business case. And because it's not just about costs, do we cut? And we've had this discussion before, 2 council meetings ago. We really also need to look at what are we going to do about these external income streams? How are we going to maximize grants? Did you know there's no specific officer looking at grants at all? I've tried to get this information, but no one's available. We need to look at building our trading operations, and as both Councillor Werner and Councillor De Costa have said, maybe even taking services in-house. And then there's the council tax. We must have an open, honest, and transparent discussion in public about the impact of low council tax on the borough council, especially the vulnerable. You know, we're affecting those who should have a bright future ahead of them. And of course, our staff with these cuts. So we've got to have this open discussion and really test the tempo. We may never get to the situation where we say we're going to increase by 10%. Are we going to actually going to, how should I put it, lobby the government? What's our strategy here for increasing council tax? We can't just ignore it. We have to look at it. So we have to be open, honest, vulnerable, visionary for the sake of our residents, the vulnerable, the elderly, and our young people. Now, there are lots of other things I could say, but I won't, except for this one thing. There are flaws in the corporate plan, both in the consultation and the implementation. We are putting into this budget an unapproved corporate plan. We haven't approved it yet. So how come it's in there? And the corporate plan, as it happens, is really, shows really poor ambition on climate change and many other environmental crises, which will blight, again, our young people. So I'm going to stop there, but I would ask, please consider these issues. Please consider them now and come back to me, and let's look at them for the future, for the next budget, for the corporate plan. Let's get this thing better, because it's not good enough at the moment. Thank you.
5 minutes. Thank you very much, Councillor De Costa. Ladies and gentlemen, because this is going to proceed a bit longer, I think it's a good time to have a 5-minute comfort break should people need to avail themselves of that. So we'll hold proceedings for 5 minutes and then reconvene.
So glad you did that, because I wanted to go. I thought, to go, I won't get out to go.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now resume the meeting once we have our last. I hate that, don't you, being the last person in, so terrible. Thank you very much, and we'll now carry on the debate. Councillor Jeff Hill.
Right, I come with. All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for calling me to speak. I thank the officers for their work and diligence in producing this budget. It's fair to say it's been a tough one. So what were we left with? 203 million of debts, thanks Tories. Land values set by developers. Council tax, £322 per household below our neighbours. Borrowing to fund revenue expenditure and non-revenue generating capital projects. Adult social care debt of 5.8 million. A customer service centre target doubled due to reduced headcount. Calls answered in 2 minutes, not one. If you can't hit a target, make up one you can. Some officers' pay has stagnated, causing difficulties in recruitment and retention. Maidenhead Golf Club capital receipts trumpeted by the Tories at 500 million. The real figure is circa 225 million. It's now down to around 100. The developer is contractually allowed to reduce land values paid to RBWM under the Tories administration's development agreement. This isn't the only rotten Tory property deal. A hollowed out officer corps, 75% staff capacity to do 100% of the work. A budget of around 30 million below what is needed on a spend of 118 million. I award the Tories a PhD in financial incompetence and several Oscars for appalling development favourable RBWM property deals. Key questions. Why didn't the auditors pick up on this and scream it from the rooftops? Members of the past administration, where are they now? Why did so many choose not to stand or resign? The good news, we're fixing the mess. Despite all this, we have a balanced budget with double last year's contingency at over 3 million. That's real money, not fantasy finance. We can still maintain our streets, bus services, and improve cycling and walking routes. We have increased footfall in our towns, and car park usage is markedly increased due to communications initiatives. We've not increased car parking charges in Victoria Street, Windsor, and Hines Meadow, Maidenhead, ensuring residents have an option if they do not wish to pay extra charges. We're slowly fixing some of the officer resource shortages too. All IT projects, all IT planned upgrades have either taken place or are taking place. The adult social care debt is under control. We expect it to be below 5 million by the end of this financial year and make similar progress throughout 2024-2025. Thus, proving with selfless dedication to the health of the public purse and putting the interests of the electorate front and centre of our thinking, we can and will turn RBWM around. I commend this budget to the Chamber and ask all members to vote in favour of its adoption. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Story.
Thank you. Fundamental to understanding the budget before Council tonight is understanding what's happened to the finances since May last year when the Liberal Democrats took over the Council. This year, unfortunately, the Council will have its first budget deficit in 5 years. It's a deficit which will wipe out the 4 years of budget surpluses under the Conservatives. A year ago, as we've heard, the Council's reserves were more than £10 million, well above the minimum of £7.9 million. And the effect of this year's deficit is that reserves are now less than £4 million. Over half the reserves have been spent in less than a year. These figures show that this year the council's finances have worsened significantly. So what's gone wrong? The budget, repeated several times tonight, laments the low council tax set by the Conservatives. If only council tax could be increased to the levels of other councils, we're told, life would be so much easier. But just think what families would have to sacrifice if their council tax bill was hundreds of pounds a year higher than it is now. It's really extraordinary that in these tough economic times, you're saying the residents you represent should be paying more council tax so that you have more of their money to spend.
Yeah.
Another reason given for the financial collapse is that the council has excessive debt. Well, Moody's doesn't think so. Moody's is one of the leading credit rating agencies in the world. They know when debt is excessive and they know when it's not. Moody's has published a list of councils with excessive debt, and this council was not on that list. And a ranking of the debt of all councils placed this council's debt well into the bottom half of that list. So the Conservatives produced 4 years of budget surpluses with the debt as it is and with low council tax. Why can't this administration do that? The answer, Councillor Jones could well say later, is that last year the Conservatives produced a fake budget. Tonight's budget makes clear that it's the Chief Financial Officer who has the duty, and importantly, it's a statutory duty, to ensure a council's budget is robust. If you accept that the Chief Financial Officer this year and last fulfilled that statutory duty rigorously, and I'm sure most of us do accept that, you can also be sure that last year's budget was as robust as the budget before council tonight. So what's the true reason for the financial collapse? The answer lies in what happened and what didn't happen in those 5 months between May the 4th and October the 10th, the date of that crisis council meeting. Starting weeks before May the 4th, as well as in the days immediately afterwards, you were given intensive briefings covering every aspect of the finances. Nothing would have been left out, including the immediate corrective action you had to take to deal with any budget variances. So why the wait until October? Did our officer team fail to brief you on every aspect of the finances? Did they leave anything out? Very unlikely, I think. And it's inconceivable that they failed to tell you immediately after you took office the corrective action you had to take to deal with any likely budget variances. I'm sure you understood and assimilated what you were being told, but as we all know, there's a difference between understanding something and taking action, and that is the core of the problem. Whatever the reason for the delay, the effect was that you didn't get on top of the numbers quickly enough. And by the time you called that October council meeting and had belatedly begun to take some action, you were already into the second half of the year. And though you could mitigate some of the losses, it was too late by then to mitigate them all. Critical in this budget is the statement that next year, as happened this year, you will face unforeseen costs. You will face maybe significant unforeseen costs, costs that are unavoidable and beyond your control. And that's why, as the statement also says, you must monitor this budget carefully and take corrective action quickly.
5 minutes.
That's what you failed to do this year, and that's the reason for the collapse in the finances. I really hope you've learnt that lesson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Story. Councillor Cowan-Davies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would like to thank the Place Directorate and the fantastic sustainability team in particular for their creative, positive and proactive approach to tackling the incredibly tough financial position that we have inherited thanks to the reckless decisions made by the previous administration. The financial circumstances have not stopped us from being ambitious in our approach to reducing carbon and increasing biodiversity, though. In fact, quite the opposite. People sometimes speak as if sustainability measures are only going to cost us money and we can't afford them. And I remain deeply disappointed at the messaging to this effect coming from central government. But I would just this evening like to highlight a few of the plans that we have that cut carbon and save us money. Windsor Leisure Centre is seeing over £6 million of investment in decarbonisation, fully funded by a public sector decarbonisation scheme grant for £5.5 million and topped up by Section 106 money. The gas-fired boilers will be replaced by air source heat pumps, air handling units and a solar PV array, and will save us thousands over many years. A genuine transformation programme is underway in centralising energy billing. Now bear with me because this isn't the stuff of headlines, but it's important. It means that the money saved in administrating hundreds of invoices across the entire council in all the departments can be sort of brought together in one department. And the amount of money saved can fund an energy analyst to identify areas of unusual usage across the council's estate. And that means we can start to tackle the causes of excessive or unusual energy use, and again, cut carbon and save money. In continuing to fund the climate partnership, we're getting more for less, and we have exciting plans for building on the valuable projects that the partnership's already undertaken, with the aim of sharing knowledge and skills and building up capacity across businesses, organisations and community groups. There are many examples of brilliant groups locally, but I would particularly like to mention the Wilds, who are working hard with us to deliver our biodiversity action plan for the borough. We're working creatively and in partnership with the rest of the borough to deliver these plans. There are also fantastic plans for infrastructure improvements across the borough to support electric vehicles by massively accelerating the rollout of the borough's EV charge point implementation plan, utilising a government grant. And there are also plans to support healthy, active travel with the Great Park link in Windsor, healthy routes to schools in Old Windsor and in West Windsor. These are just a few examples of what we're doing that is going to both save us money and cut carbon. The financial position, as we know, remains extremely challenging for the foreseeable future, but we lack no ambition, and I am nonetheless very excited for the future of the council's work on climate change and biodiversity, and I strongly commend this budget to members.
Councillor Mark Howard.
I'd just like to focus in on one part of the budget which has grabbed my attention, and it is about the thing which I get most comments from my residents about, and it's the frustration about service delivery in front of them on things like potholes and delivery of other types of goods which most people see every day. And when I started becoming a councillor 9 months ago, it was this issue about the effective management of the contracts which was most in my mind. I have since found that the council was unfortunately hollowed out of professional contract negotiators, relationship managers, people who were, excuse me, thank you. It's been hollowed out of professional staff who are able to manage their contracts properly and are able to deliver the objectives that residents have asked them to do. So I support this contract because it is, this budget proposal, because it is bringing the management of contracts back in-house, where people who are aligned with the objectives of residents and the council are focusing in on what matters rather than letting suppliers mark their own homework, which is obviously related to the profit margins that they can deliver to themselves. So thank you for doing that. And my residents will support this effective management of contracts going forward.
Councillor Del Campo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2020, a former Conservative member of this council described his own party's financial legacy as a cultural failure of epic proportions. And it was one of the rare times that I agreed with him wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, the next 3 years did little to remedy that situation. So, you know, here we are facing the challenge of how to rescue our finances and to do so in a way that remains true to our principles. It hasn't been easy, but I do feel that we've brought back some humanity and we have started to give officers the support and resources they need to deliver on our priorities. There's still a way to go, of course there is, but the tanker is starting to turn. The big news in adults is that we have corrected the base budget, so it's now much closer to the actual cost of delivering services. I'd love to say that means adults won't overspend this year, but of course I can't say that. When you have a service that's almost entirely statutory and demand-led, just a few complex cases can have a profound effect on the finances. But I can say that we will not start the year needing to find £5 million worth of ill-defined in-year savings, as we did in April 2023. Delivering on our manifesto pledges, we are investing to save. A small project we kicked off in January was to reallocate funds for long-term unfilled social worker posts to uplift full-time salaries to compare with nearby boroughs and reduce our dependence on agencies. As a result of that, we already have one employee deciding to stay with us who is looking elsewhere. And at a recent graduate fair, we had 6 expressions of interest compared to 0 previously. This is an approach that's already helped reduce turnover in children's. And I'm hopeful that as we realise savings in the social worker team, we can extend the principles to other teams. Doing this is good for the finances, but it's also good for residents in terms of giving them that consistency of care that they need. At the other end of the investor save scale, we are looking at whether to run our own care home. This week I visited the Bluebell Care Home, which is being run by Optilis on behalf of Wokingham Borough Council. It was good to see some of the early positive changes that are being delivered for residents and staff there. We're still at the very early stages of this process. Business modelling is being done. We're looking to see what's available out there, but we're also looking to see what's happening in other boroughs. While some are going down this route, others are getting out, and it's really important that we understand their reasons for doing so and use that to shape our business plan. Positives are that Optilis provides a very high standard of care, and doing this would enable us to deliver services to the residents we have a responsibility for at cost, but also generate income through privately funded residents and influence local care prices generally. Another manifesto pledge was to insource where it's appropriate to do so. I've already told you that Optilis is providing good service to our residents, so we won't be touching that. But what we are looking at is how to bring more of the statutory services back into RBWM. That means activities like decisions about the care people need, commissioning of services from third-party providers, and the finances, bringing the teams that handle the money back together, which, with the help of our new case management system, should help to prevent the new cases of bad debt that Councillor Hill was talking about. We also promised to do more on social housing, and while this is another pledge that will take a while to realise, I am delighted that when the new development at Sawyers Close opens, there will be 32 additional homes for social rent available to our housing team. Our new Director of Housing joined us in October and is already going above and beyond to improve processes and deliver on our priorities. I want to extend my thanks to officers across adults, health and place/housing, the senior leadership team, cabinet and members who've worked so hard to help us bring this budget forward today. Please support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maureen Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and my apologies for my voice. I've had laryngitis. I think I still have it, quite frankly. So I'll keep this short. I'd like to thank the senior officers and the finance team for all the work that's gone into producing this budget. Now, we all see on the news councils across the country are having difficulties, and of course ours is no exception. The big ticket item being social care services, which takes approximately 80% of our funding. This is a statutory service all councils must provide. But the cost of providing these services has increased, which is now a huge issue. I welcome some of our outsourced services, which members across the floor have mentioned, being brought back into the council. The last administration started this in some areas and was looking to continue. So I'm very pleased that this administration is continuing the trend, as the time is really right now for that. I also welcome increased monitoring of the finances in Cabinet. However, it appears to me that the transformation programme of the way services are provided is key. There is a lack of detail as to how the new corporate transformation programme will achieve this aim and deliver the savings promised. And I'm a bit concerned that this could be one of the key risks in this year's budgets. The medium-term financial strategy through to 28-29 and the assumptions regarding capital income and CIL are always going to be affected by outside influences. The figures do seem to fluctuate greatly from one budget to another, and I would like to have more assurance that the level of reserves have been fully examined and are robust to ensure this budget is deliverable, not just currently adequate, as is said. I would like to see more focus on growth rather than reshaping, which is said. Going forward, there are areas that I'd like to see more focus on, which would aid in making this budget deliverable. Recruitment and retention. Is there enough allocated for this? We do need to be in a position to attract and retain our staff. And Councillor Da Costa mentioned this, but what focus has been placed on this? Income generation. We need to generate income. We need to think outside the box, as Councillor Carol Da Costa mentioned, rather than focus increases on our residents, such as increasing parking charges, pitch charges, planning fees, which makes this definitely not a people's budget. I would like us to look at better use of our assets to support the delivery of this budget. Have we looked at all our assets and how best to make them more attractive for marketing use? And I can see nods from across the floor, so I'm pleased that this is affirmed. I'd like to see the full list if you don't mind. Thank you. It is obvious we need to generate surpluses going forward to increase our financial viability. But this budget, as it stands, does not appear to deliver the surpluses needed. There are too many acknowledged and incorporated risks in this budget. We've got allocations of funding could prove to be inadequate for reasons beyond the control of the council. We've got already emerging gap between the rebased budget and the rising reality. And we've got significant risk of capacity and capability, all in this budget. Mr. Mayor, I have no option to say I simply cannot support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hand. Councillor Moriarty.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to bring up the topic of consultation, because it's been mentioned a couple of times tonight. and having been asked to act as consultation champion after the election, it's worth noting the substantial amount of work that's gone on to understand, map out, improve consultations, both by colleagues in this room, but also by officers. But we do have some way to go. I think residents would agree that the quality, frequency, communication of, and the impact of consultations in the past, the consultation approach that we've inherited has not been good enough. One of the most common things I've heard from residents since reviewing that process is that they feel that their voice was simply not heard when it came to some of the most important decisions made in this borough and previous administrations. The council today is determined to be at the heart of the community. That's one of our stated aims. And a crucial part of that is to ensure that we give that community a voice, and a voice that needs to be central to decisions at multiple levels of the council's operation. We need to ensure that consultations are easy to engage with, easy to understand, free from technical information where it isn't necessary, and perhaps even when it is, simple to fill out, and maximises the precious attention given to us by residents so that we can extract the most insight. We need to make sure we're asking about behaviours as much as we're asking about viewpoints. If we're consulting on a travel policy, let's understand what's behind the decisions behind travel choices, what change opinions about travel. In other words, when it comes to consultation, it's important that we ask questions that paint the widest possible picture, not a narrow focus on the wording of a single piece of policy. We need to move beyond a total reliance on surveys and create different opportunities to feedback, more opportunities to listen on platforms that residents already interact with, as well as our own. And we need to make sure residents know why they're being asked for their opinion and what it will contribute to, and when and how they can expect to see results. We need to make sure every corner of the community has the opportunity to contribute and have their voices heard and represented. So why do I say this? Well, firstly, to highlight that I and this administration do not think that the current approach to consultation is good enough and needs to be improved. Secondly, that I and this administration is determined to work with officers to raise the standard of consultations across the board in every corner of the organisation. Finally, that this time next year, the budget will have a stronger consultation base behind it.
Thank you, Councillor Moriarty. Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first aim of our emerging council plan is to put the council on a strong financial footing to serve the borough effectively. I know my friend, the leader of the council, prefers simply fixing the mess, but however we put it, there's no escaping that the linchpin for meeting our vision for the borough of a safer, greener and cleaner communities with opportunity for all rests in this aim. As our Chief Financial Officer states in her frank assessment of the critical financial position, this cabinet does not have the luxury of planning crowd-pleasing spending sprees. Instead, we must deliver the unpalatable news of efficiencies and spending controls as they stand shoulder to shoulder with officer team to find ways to save the council. I want to speak about one important priority in meeting this financial aim, which is to drive efficiencies through strong asset management. By this, I mean that we need to optimise use of the buildings, land and other assets that the council owns on behalf of residents to generate income, and also to streamline our capital programme to reduce further borrowing and make better use of SEAL and Section 106 funding. Thinking about our purely commercial assets, the council has a modest portfolio, and I'm pleased to support property and capital bids to carry out improvement works in this so that we can attract better rental yields, but also to bring these properties up to the minimum energy efficiency standards. For our assets that are currently deployed for delivery of services, we need to look at ways of optimising the use to make savings. For an example in this year's budget is the relocation of the pensions fund staff out of Minster Court, making better use of spare capacity within the town hall, saving an unnecessary rent cost. But we also need to be ambitious in our ideas if we want to see genuinely meaningful savings. Services such as adults and children's social care and housing are beholden to the costs imposed by the private sector. As part of our commitment to deliver more services in-house, we are seriously looking at the properties we own with a view to establishing our own care home facilities and temporary accommodation. This will be a council-wide effort. However, where it's clear that there's no viable option for retaining and optimising the use of the asset in a way that generates service savings in excess of the interest and MRP charges that could be realised by applying the proceeds of this, we instead want to apply the proceeds of the sale to pay down inherited debt. And we, of course, in those circumstances, need to consider disposal. But I want to be clear that we are not suggesting there needs to be a fire sale of assets. These decisions must be taken holistically, and we must never lose sight of the fact that we are custodians of the borough's assets, and the social value they can offer often goes beyond the pure financial. Where capital receipts are generated, then in simple terms, we have two choices of how we could use these. We can reduce our debt, and in so doing, free revenue budget to relieve pressure on resident services. Alternatively, these receipts can act as seed funding for our genuine programme of service transformation. And where the savings arising are anticipated to exceed the debt service costs that would otherwise be saved, this can make sound fiscal sense. I want to conclude by saying that there can be no doubt this council is in a financial perilous situation. However, I am optimistic that this budget, as tough as it is a vital step in our journey to a sound financial future where we can then focus on delivering great services for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burmans, and Councillor Helen Price.
I don't think any of us wanted to be considering a budget with so many savings, or in other words, cuts. With the state of our financial situation, it's obviously the non-statutory services which bear the brunt of these cuts. My concern is the impact this will have on our poorest residents. Our poorest residents are facing price rises outside our control, food price rises which disproportionately impact our poorest, rent and service charges way in excess of inflation, the loss of central government household support fund. I refer to what we're told in the Equality Impact Assessment, Appendix N, under the heading Socioeconomic Disadvantage, e.g. low income poverty. We've not analysed the social economic profile of those who responded to the consultation. I believe we should, in future consultations, try and capture the information or the views on our poorest residents will not be heard. We're informed that the removal of the library inclusion post, the removal of the printed around the Royal Borough, and the removal of the school transport to excluded pupils will disproportionately impact our poorest residents. And yet, our draft corporate plan, Appendix A, states our priority, aim for, is to reduce inequalities. So what are we doing about this apparent conflict? I welcome that we will signpost to alternative services, and in particular our community groups. I welcome that our community team will work on this and urge that we break down our silo working, which, to be honest, still exists. And we continue to strive to engage better with our community groups. I really welcome the creation of the Voluntary and Community Sector Partnership to include the One Borough, WAM Get Involved, RBWM and the Berkshire Community Foundation. In addition, the continued work with the Household Support Fund Partnership with its 18 partners to support our most vulnerable communities. Both of these will create more streamlined and cohesive working. We have our award-winning Here to Help, which must be continually updated and promoted. We have our council tax reduction scheme. We have 2 new financial officers, and I've already requested that they offer sessions from Dedworth Library, which is surrounded by some of our poorest residents. We need to work also with organisations such as our housing providers to ensure we don't duplicate efforts and resources, and most importantly, identify any gaps in provision. We need more residents to encourage residents to volunteer. And in a few weeks, our communities team are relaunching our volunteering campaign. In Maidenhead, Councillor Jack Douglas is working hard to encourage and support volunteering. In Windsor, a paper-based directory of community groups and volunteering opportunities is soon to be published, supported by our Innovations Fund. So in conclusion,
We have to communicate and collaborate our support and provision. So who's the we? That's members, officers, community organisations, partner organisations, and of course our local press. We all have a role to play in supporting our poorest residents. Thank you.
Councillor Gary Reeves.
So when I considered to stand as a new councillor, or at least to be voted in, I hoped, back 3 years ago, even I personally then could see the state that this borough was being put in. When I look at the inflationary rates and the CPI that we were actually having to face in 2021, and it continued in 2022, I knew that we would have difficulty in increasing costs and it lowering the power of our spend. And so because of that, it really drove me to want to make a difference and to stand and not allow the continual risk that this borough was being put under by the current administration. They had an attitude of gambling with our money around what I could clearly see, and other economic minded people would have realised would require higher interest rates, and so we would have to service the debt that they were building up. I've heard about the reserves that they've built up, £10 million of reserves. Then how much is it costing us in just pure interest in this current budget? £13.5 million. Now, I think if you do the maths, that to me is not good maths. And it certainly is not robust financial decision-making. Also, when I came in as a contracts professional, I was quite dismayed by the state of the contracts. I could even see that. If we look at the contract and the contract decisions that were made whilst the Tories were in power, such as being held to account for a very low price to sell off the old magnet centre. That is not good contracting. That is not good contract management. I really appreciate the officers and the leadership team that when I first came in, not only was I a new councillor, and in my first month, they were happy to actually be self-effacing enough to allow us to talk to them about their contracting process, their procurement, to allow us to actually go through it with them. And I'm really pleased to actually hear from them that they also share the concerns that we had about the state of that, and how actually going forward with growing the procurement staff, the approach to contract management, so that we can actually regain the spending power that we need. When you look at the current inflationary rates and the CPI, that our contract terms are actually, that they are required to increase the cost of services, then you'll realise that with 4.9% as current inflation and previously 8%, we are trying to play catch up with actually our budget. Another thing that I wanted to point out with this budget is that it's very clear that the increase in social care, and 77% of our budget is actually spent on social care. Add to that, that we also are utilising 11% of our budget just on that interest payment, not reducing it, just servicing the interest. That leaves me to think 12% of our budget is left to be able to spend on these non-statutory services that we would love to be able to do more with. But it simply isn't there. 12% of the entire budget is left for us to do it. And I think that the officers and fellow members have done a great job in actually trying to make the best of what we have. And I look forward to be able to be part of that and to be able to continue to work to build this foundation so that I know I can look my daughters in the eyes and say, we are establishing a great foundation that will secure this borough for its residents in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Reeve. Councillor Julian Tizzy.
Thank you to all the speakers so far on all sides of this house. So I'd just like to start, I want to talk about two things, borrowing and prudence. But just to reiterate where we are, we started with, of course, as has been said, 10 million reserves brought forward, and that's very low for a unitary authority. And the deficit for this year, the year that's just finishing, that we inherited was 7 million. So we inherited a deficit. Now, it was talked about, well, you know, the cost saving when it started. Of course, it started pretty much straight away. It was announced in October. It started straight away. And actually, had it not been for some of the demand-led statutory increases in costs in adult services and children's services, actually we would have been able to hopefully get very close to a balanced budget. We've pretty much gone from 7 almost down to 0, or just about 1, and then back up to 7 again. I think we ended up at about 6, I think that is the number. Now, with inflation in this year, has been double figures, whereas there's a maximum that we can charge of 4.99%. You don't need to be an accountant as I am to know that you've got a problem. And we are not alone in having a deficit this year. It is just the way it is. But let me just talk about borrowing, because this is possibly one of the most least discussed items, but it's probably one of the most important. As has just been said just a second ago by Councillor Reeves, £13.5 million in the budget we're looking at now is going to be the interest in the MRP. 13.5 million, that's about 11% of our budget, or £1 in every 9. £1 in every 9 is going to be spent on interest and MRP. And what do we get for that as residents? Well, we get nothing. We get nothing. We just have to pay it. And what I've heard from the thing about borrowing is you have to service it, so there's that cost, and you have to refinance it. Now, just on refinancing, so they had until recently a very, very junior person who literally would say, oh yeah, okay, what's it? It's coming up for refinancing, or what's the spot rate? There you go, off you go. It was just appalling financial management, such a big number. And given that actually we've just had to a lot of it, about 100 million has just come up, and we've had to do that. That's just appalling. And thankfully, thank the officers who've really done very well to take it at a much more senior level, and they've got help in, which is very, very good. So I don't like, let me just talk the second thing, which is about being realistic, being prudent. Now, as an accountant, I was sort of in despair when we kept, when previously we would attack the budget and they said, oh, you've got to be positive. No, we can't be positive. Accountants can't be positive. We have to be negative. We have to be realistic. We have to be prudent. Now, just a few examples of the difference that we've seen in this budget to what we've seen before. So previously we saw this use of CapEx bluntly to cover revenue overspend. You know, they would spend money, but then they'd find a way of putting it into CapEx. This time, the lack of scrutiny that we had, it was, don't take my word for it, SITFA has said itself, at the unrealistic assumptions. They've been mentioned before, so I won't go on to them. But the bottom up, the tighter, much better way we've controlled spending this year, I think is much, much better. Income generation ideas. Some people have said we need to be generating more income. Well, I totally agree. I'll give one example. It's been mentioned already. The observation wheel in Windsor. I welcome it. And actually, there are more people. I think for every person who doesn't like it, there are, I think, at least as many people who do like it. I'm one of them, I'll admit. Yes, there's only 40 million in the budget as a revenue for it, but that is prudent. That's the way we should be. Can I just finish on just 2 very specific points? Okay. I welcome some of the capital funding that we have from SIL, from money, free money. I think that's a good idea. We need to do that. I will just say, because I can see I've run out of time, I'm afraid, The novella demolition, I can see that there is an amount in there. That is not intended. We are working with people. We want to save the Novello Theatre. We're working with the community there. Just had to mention that.
5
but
minutes.
yes, thank you. Oh, thank you. Well, I'll just leave it there.
Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to mention volunteers again. There's no budget line for volunteering. You don't need a cost centre when there's no cost, of course. The money is really tight, and a lot of people are talking about the reasons for that tonight, so I'll skim over that. But let's just say we're in a difficult position, and there's a lot we can't fund that we'd like to. And volunteers are stepping into the gap there in many different ways, doing amazing work. And the budget calls out the role of volunteers. It says that volunteering is building a sense of community and strengthening residents' feeling of responsibility and ownership for local areas. It's one of those rare win-win areas where everybody benefits, even volunteers themselves. They deserve so much thanks. They spend their time and energy saving us money, or they provide what money can't buy. And I've just got a few random examples really to illustrate. Waterways volunteers did over 2,000 volunteer hours to 2023. Without their work, my ward, Maidenhead Town Centre, the streams would dry up. They saved us, them alone, have saved us tens of thousands of pounds each year, and they've also prevented, and they do prevent, an environmental disaster. There's so much amazing wildlife that depends on the water flowing all year round. Or Goodgem, with 5,000 missions in 4 years across the borough. And can anyone put a price on over 600 one-to-one social visits they've conducted? And they've helped, incredibly, nearly 100 other charitable local community groups in that time. Or, as Helen mentioned, the Maidenhead Town team. Their plan for the planters in the town will finally bring them back to life. They've been dead for far too long. It's a real partnership of volunteers, the council, and also the Braywick Heath Nursery, a fantastic bunch of people. Now, there are hundreds of other groups, as we all know. We have to give credit to them all on budget day because their work affects our health, our wealth, and our well-being. So thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members, officers and fellow residents, good evening. Mr. Mayor, firstly, I would like to thank our officers for all the hard work that has gone into this budget. I know a lot has been said about this budget already by members and our residents who have supported us to get into our positions as members of the council. It is now our turn to repay that trust that they have placed in us to serve them to the best of our ability. A major concern which has been raised by the residents of Ascot, and I believe many members can relate to this in their constituencies as well, is law and order. As some of you may recall, the previous administration, which I was not a part of, Mr. Werner, has included in their budget last year to pay for 4 dedicated police constables to be deployed across RBWM to focus on local priorities. This was the first partnership of its kind in the TVP area and reflected concerns around lack of neighbourhood policing in our area. I believe a crime summit was held in March last year with residents and stakeholders to shape the priorities for these new PCs. Even though our residents, the same residents who have put their trust in us, overwhelmingly supported the partnership, this partnership now seems to have dropped in the current budget. 4 extra police officers dedicated to tackling crime and antisocial behaviour in the Royal Borough had been proposed to be recruited to support community safety and enhance local partnership working between the council and the police. Can the lead member of finance please tell our residents, the ones who have placed their trust in us, why this legitimate concern about law and order, antisocial behaviour, traffic violation, enforcement, etc., are not being addressed? Mr. Mayor, I cannot support this budget because I believe this budget was a cost-cutting exercise and not in the benefit of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bashir, and Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I start, I just wanted to clarify something that was said earlier that referred to a partnership in the council between the Lib Dems and the Independents. So I just wanted to clarify, there's a partnership cabinet, not a partnership council. I'm an independent councillor and not in partnership with any other party. So I would like to express my thanks and appreciation to Councillor Jones and the officers for devising a balanced budget, which gives us some much needed breathing space for the upcoming year. Nevertheless, I have concerns regarding its long-term viability over the course of the next year, and I fear that we might face potential imbalances before the end of the next financial cycle. As we've heard, 77% of our budget is taken up with statutory services. This figure will continue to grow, and with the demand for these services increasing, the ageing demographic of our borough increasing, and people learning about RBWM's exceptional services, prompting them to relocate here to benefit from them. Unless the government implements significant measures to support these essential services, I am doubtful that we can maintain a balanced budget, even with the upcoming transformation project. I note the largest savings in adult services relies on people remaining in their own homes for longer and for older people to be taken in by younger people. While I'm dedicated to supporting elderly residents to remain in their homes for extended periods, as evidenced by my personal experience with my 93-year-old father who receives daily care, I am concerned by the fact that carers are rarely paid more than the minimum wage and face significant challenges in recruitment and retention. I know this was mentioned earlier by a couple of speakers, and we can't underestimate this. So due to these factors, I'm sceptical about the budget's ability to stay balanced, as unforeseen expenses are likely to arise. As a councillor representing Clewett and Dedworth East, the most deprived area in the borough, my residents are rightfully questioning the value they receive for their monthly payments of council tax. Residents have witnessed a decline in services, ranging from unfulfilled promises of flower baskets from last year's budget to inadequate grass cutting and park maintenance. Additionally, there is concern about potential reduction in bus services and the lack of any noticeable enforcement, such as the absence of the 4 police officers also promised in last year's budget. Furthermore, with the rise in parking fees to park within their own town contributes to their dissatisfaction. Less than 10% of my residents will benefit from the statutory services, so most will be thinking that they are not receiving the value for money from the council tax. Councillor Reynolds himself mentioned at last year's budget meeting that the current parking offering to residents isn't sufficient and referred to increased Windsor parking prices as tourist tax and that we should provide discounted parking to residents. However, we now find ourselves faced with even higher parking fees and still only a 1-hour free system, which is utilised by only a few residents due to the complexity of registration. If we fail to address this issue, our residents may seek alternatives to visiting our town centres or finding alternative parking arrangements. As we heard earlier, we're looking at ways to generate revenue in the budget through the Ferris wheel in Alexandra Gardens in Windsor. While I understand that the contract negotiations are ongoing, I urge the Cabinet to secure a more favourable deal than receiving only 10% of the profit, especially considering the Council's responsibility to maintain the park and cover electricity costs. This arrangement doesn't seem advantageous to us at all. Similarly, the fact that we only made 12,000 from Windsor on Ice, which occupied the park for 3 months, translates to £234 a day, which is concerning. So Windsor is the cash cow of the borough yet again, except the residents do not reap the benefits. Obviously, this is partly due to the fact that Windsor remains unparished. The unparished precept we contribute as part of our council tax could be spent anywhere in the borough, whereas if we were parish, then obviously it would be ring-fenced for Windsor. As many of you are aware, I voiced my opposition to the closure of the museum, so I'm pleased to hear that there are plans to relocate it to a more suitable location. However, I am concerned about the potential costs associated with this relocation and the refurbishment of the Guildhall, as I do not see these expenses as counted for in the budget. So for me, there are simply too many uncertainties and hopeful outcomes to provide my full support for the budget this evening. Thank you.
Councillor Sanara Luxton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This new administration claims near bankruptcy since September 2023, but they are spending. They are not showing income generating solutions or real efficiencies in services, only cuts, and hikes and tax increases to our residents. I see no debt repayment plans. I see no plans for housing solutions. I read no plans that have come forward to increase income on new housing. All I see is they are against housing. This budget has no efficient drive to generate income again, only talk of cuts and tax to residents. Our residents are entitled to have answers as to why they are being asked to pay these increase in taxes in these difficult times and in the present crisis of today's living. This is missing in the budget as there is no transparency. Government bailout monies have been received, including 1.5 million for adult services, and they blame the Conservative for their lack of financial control. I would like to ask the present administration if they take ownership and responsibility of this budget moving forward, or how long they will be blaming us backwards, the Conservative, as that's been our target for tonight. This is not a budget I would want to put my name to. I will not be supporting this budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Luxton. Councillor Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2 months ago, I spoke to a group of residents in my ward, and they asked me what are our top 5 priorities for us in administration. And I told them that our #1 priority was still being here as a council in 12 months' time. We've heard a lot of S words, Mr. Mayor. Well, we've heard one S word said a lot of times. I've got a different S word, solid. And that's what backs this budget up. It's stable, and it is a fantastic way to build off going forward. Now we've fixed the mess that we were given. I want to touch a little bit about the town centre because it's been mentioned a few times today. And obviously we're here tonight in Maidenhead. We are not going to say thank you for the horrible legacy that the previous administration has lumbered us with in the town centre. 18 Tory tower blocks looming over us are not a legacy we are going to thank the previous administration for. But what are we doing differently? I hear people will be asking. Well, Nando's, Bombay Story, Tomo, Sushi Point, Cars Direct, Pet Jesty, Arrowsmiths, Sauce and Flour, Hobbycraft, Vanilla Cakes, New Greek, Wagamama's, and Tesco being brought back onto the high street. That's what this administration is doing for our high streets. That is what we are doing, the previous administration didn't. We've heard a lot of scaremongering about fictitious spends on taxi liveries. Well, the total spent so far is 0. 0. So let's not just guess the figures or come to full council and pretend that we might know. You did that in your last budget and we know what that's left us with. We've heard many times tonight, Mr. Mayor, where's our plan? Well, if you've read the budget papers, you'll see Appendix A titled Council Plan. So let me recite it for you. Strong finances, cleaner, greener, safer, children and young people being given a great start in life, healthy and independent lives, and a council that delivers for residents of the borough. That's the plan of this administration. That's the positive place this council is moving to. And this administration champions our residents and champions our businesses. How do we show that plan? 6.3 million of decarbonisation money, 850,000 for additional street lighting compared to the mad 27-year contract the previous administration signed, 1.2 million for repairs and maintenance in our schools, 200,000 for a new health suite at Windsor Leisure Centre, 310,000 to fix the Braywit Leisure Centre that was not fit for purpose when they built it only a few years ago, 1.2 million for pothole repairs, 2.5 million for highway and footway resurfacing, 200 grand in roadway safety schemes, 300 in healthy routes to school, 1.2 million for the LC whip and £600,000 for EV infrastructure, delivering 500 new EV chargers by May next year, compared to the Tory plan of only 50. All funded by grants, Section 106 and SIL money. That's what this administration is delivering. That's what we are doing. The choice is clear: positive change to fix the mess of previous Tory budgets, or more hiding behind the past, shirking the responsibility of their legacy. Residents made up their minds in last May. When will they wake up and realise it?
Councillor Gosling.
I also would like to add my thanks for all those involved in the onerous task of producing this budget. It's already been said that challenges have to be met, and our council is no different in having to face those challenges. In this country, there is a total combined council debt of £97.8 billion. We have spoken at length about social services and our commitment, and I welcome any change where we can combine forces with other areas to save costs. However, when I see some iconic institutions being cut and then moved, I question how this helps the budget. I refer to the Windsor Museum, which should be preserved in its current position. By moving it, there will be costs and it might no longer be visited. I ask those present here today to look at the cuts proposed within this budget, to see how things can be done differently, to further increase our revenue and maintain many of our existing services. It takes minutes to destroy and years to rebuild. I feel that there are further revenue opportunities, and these have to be explored. And for this reason, I cannot support the budget today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gosling. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too would like to thank all officers, especially Lynn and our CFO, for all their hard work in getting us to this position from a very challenging starting point. I'll keep this very brief. My concern around this budget is that it's predicated on the fact that it is reliant on delivering at pace the transformation and efficiency targets that have been mentioned. Financial resiliency is low, and I would argue that the margin for error is high. And couple this with the fact that we've had 2 years of unaudited figures, there is a lot that could go wrong. However, in the briefings we've had ahead of today, I have been given assurances that we do have a team inside this council with the experience to successfully deliver this balanced budget. We have governance in place and early warning triggers to highlight quickly and with transparency any of those efficiency savings that are not going to plan, and also spotlight any of the growth targets that are stalling. Will this be easy? No, I don't think it will be. But as we've heard tonight, after a lot of work, we now have a balanced budget. And as a new administration, I hope that we can move forwards with conviction and confidence that we can and will deliver this for our residents. Finally, I do want to raise tonight one area of significant spend in our budget. That is home to school transport, that is costing this council multiple millions of pounds to deliver, and that number is increasing. I know as a council, we're not alone in this challenge, and delivering this statutory demand-led service, I do understand that there is some work already underway to see if efficiencies can be made. But I would like to see this in the priority list of areas that we fully scrutinise for additional financial efficiencies, especially reviewing operationally the way that this is currently being delivered for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Councillor Amy Teasey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to begin my remarks this evening with a vote of thanks to Lynn Ferguson, our Director for Children's Services, Clive Haynes, Deputy Director for Education, Sarah Moran, Deputy Director for Children's Social Care and Early Help, and every single member of staff who works in Achieving for Children, delivering our children's services in RBWM. When faced with the mammoth task of finding nearly £3 million of savings in children's services, everyone came together and found new ways to make those savings and generate income. Compared to many, children's services in RBWM is already a high achieving but relatively low spending service. And so to identify savings that wouldn't risk the fundamental service we provide to families was a huge challenge. Last year, in my final budget speech in opposition, I reviewed the empty promises versus the poor performance of the Conservative administration, particularly towards early help services and family hubs. They'd planned to slash early help services, close the family hubs, damage the youth offending service, and scrapped ideas to retain social workers. The worst of those cuts were only warded off due to the pressure of people in this room. This year, things are different. I previously pledged that if I were made lead member, thank you Simon, I was, I would defend early help services. Now, despite the extreme pressures facing this budget, I am proud to say we have done that because we know that in the long term, early intervention in the families that are struggling can prevent children having to be taken from their family home. That's better for our budget, but ultimately it's better for children. Not only that, but through properly planned and delivered transformation, such as the Think Family project, we can make savings now whilst also improving our services to families. Is the risk over? No. The 2.6 million that's been added to the base budget is a more realistic starting point, but we all know that children's services is very pressure-led and it faces cost increases that can't always be mitigated. If a child or a young person needs to be placed outside the family home for their safety, we can't and we won't ignore that call. Just one or two expensive placements has a huge impact, as we've seen in the last few months. We are at the mercy of markets for placements, but we have a plan. AFC have a renewed drive to increase the number of in-house foster carers, including connected carers, and I urge anybody who thinks that they might just be interested in being a foster carer to come forward and speak to us. In other areas, we're actively looking at the possibility of opening our own home for children, and the ingenuity of our staff has meant that we can start to commercialise their skills that we have in-house by providing traded educational psychology services to other boroughs. We're also using our grant funding to best effect by increasing provision for children with special educational needs and disabilities at our existing special and mainstream schools. And as Councillor Cross mentioned, yes, the home to school transport budget, it is a large part of our budget because of the massive increase in need of our young people. And by bringing more for them locally, hopefully we can reduce some of those costs, and we're carrying out an extensive review of the service, which is already very tight. I stand behind the proposals for children's services, and I stand alongside the dedicated team of professionals across children's social care and education who will continue to work tirelessly to deliver the best for our families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gertzing.
Thank you there, Mr. Mayor. Most of what I had jotted down has been said, but what I did want to do, I want to respond to comments made from the Conservatives regarding SIL and the lack of it in Maidenhead Town Centre. The majority of development is taking place in Maidenhead, and in opposition, we repeatedly called for this zero charging schedule in Maidenhead to be reviewed, but the previous Conservative administration had refused and stated that they needed to support developers. Now, I've got an excerpt from a property expert on my computer at the moment, and within it, he states that had a measure similar to that what is adopted in Wickham Town Centre of £298 per square metre and calculated at 60,000 square metres, which is the size of the Nicholson's Quarter development, that would have brought RBWM just shy of £18 million in community infrastructure levy contributions. At a hearing that I attended, along with one other, Mr. Mayor was actually there at the time as well, a 3-day hearing I attended regarding the same developer. They declared in that meeting that they were making in excess of £90 million on that scheme. This zero seal had a profound and today having a profound impact on the council's finances. The developer didn't need the support, it was a council, and the Conservatives supported that zero charging schedule right the way through the last administration. And now the position we're in is a result of that. Thank you.
Councillor Richard Coe.
Council, at the heart of the problems faced by this council is the Conservatives borrowing to spend. Mrs. Thatcher will be turning in her grave, but of course, in her day, they didn't have the magic money tree as their logo. So what was the Conservative master plan? Cut the council tax, borrow millions, invest the borrowing in money-generating assets to replace the council tax revenue, sell the family silver for the fantasy 500 million, pay off the debt, balance the books, happy days. Superb. What went wrong? Well, they cut the council tax successfully, costing us 30 million a year today. They borrowed the millions successfully, 200 million borrowed at the moment. Investing in income-generating assets, oh dear. I'm sure Councillor Hill can tell us how many thousands a week Vickers Way is losing, but some. Sell the family silver, oh dear. Magnet, the golf course, given away well below the value in a buy now, pay next decade deal. The result? They didn't pay off the debt. They didn't balance the books. They did run up a massive interest bill of £13.5 million a year this year. And they did give the donors, the developer donors, really good value for money on the land they were buying. So it was Conservative hubris that broke the borough's finances. They overestimated their business acumen. They underestimated the risks they had taken on. And that is why all of these land sale deals have resulted in revenues or capital receipts to the council far lower than predicted or even claimed in exaggerated CVs online. This council, by contrast, is determined to be responsible. This is a responsible budget which takes tough decisions, painful decisions for many residents. We acknowledge that. But it is a budget to get back on track. I want to thank all of the officers for their hard work in delivering this budget, particularly those in my portfolio who have delivered six-figure savings, and particularly the Chief Finance Officer, who I know works very long hours because of the times I get replies from her. This is a tough, responsible, and grown-up budget to fix the mess, and I will be happy to support it.
Councillor Ewan Narcombe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Things could have been worse. Seriously, if you remember, the previous administration pulled out of the River Thames scheme, Channel 1. That would have meant a contribution of £53 million from this council into the Environment Agency coffers. And they pulled out. So River Thames scheme, Channel 1, was taken away. We now have a consultation. This is the book. And that's the feedback that you can fill out for the River Thames scheme as it is now, which is channels 2 and 3. You've got until Monday evening to fill it in and say whatever you think about it. I know what I think. Sorry. On flooding, there's a new channel proposed, the Datchet to Hythe End flood improvement measures. Your contribution is expected to be in the region of £10 million for what I consider to be a substandard scheme in comparison with the one that was already developed. Interestingly enough, we already have a contract, but it doesn't appear to have been signed. And in the back, it looks as though this council is putting in 2 lots of £450 million. That's 450,000 pounds, sorry. Yeah, no, my mistake. Anyway, that's £900,000 over the next 2 years. So it doesn't seem to have a signature. So I don't suppose we're going to go much further forward with it, but we will find out soon enough. We won't worry about that. Last little thing, because I won't take up any more or much more of your time. I saw a little bit in the newspaper about 4 of our directors from the property company resigning simultaneously. I'm not asking for an answer now, but it would be very interesting to find out why 4 directors went simultaneously from our property company. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to know too.
Thank you, Councillor Larkham. I think we've come now to the end of the debate, so if I can invite Councillor Jones to sum up, please.
Things that have been said tonight. It's not the amount of debt a council has, it's their ability to pay it off that affects our revenue budget. Interest rates were almost zero when the Conservatives grew that debt to the 200 million it is now. And obviously those interest rates have gone up. And as we heard, our borrowing costs are now 13 million, 11% of our budget. Horrendous. The statutory unbudgeted social care that's at the root of our reserves being halved is not a matter of monitoring these statutory costs. They are not optional. You can monitor it as much as you like. You still have to pay them. The numbers over the last year of people accessing care have remained stable, give or take 2%. So how come they were unbudgeted to the amount that the Conservatives did last time? How did they do that? Those numbers were in place at the time of the budget. They've stayed stable. I'm sorry, that to me was extremely disappointing, and it should never have happened. Transformation, we will not be repeating the mistakes of the Conservative administration, where no plans are in place, and although there was a transformation subcommittee, it never met. Transformation boards are already in place. We have provided project resource to carry out the transformation. The transformations are proposed by the officers, already backed by plans and overseen by the executive leadership. And then they will be reported to Cabinet. This is not a hidden process. Let's have a look, the police officers. That's quite a funny one, 4 police officers. So if you take 4 officers and you take maybe one of them's on leave or on other duties, that then leaves 3. That's 1 a shift. So that's 1 officer to cover the whole of the borough each day. That to me was not a good deal. And in fact, that money should be spent, I believe, on our community wardens, which was such a good thing. And the reduction of our community wardens from 15 to what they are now was a disgrace. How could that happen? Especially when the banners that cost 20,000 and put up all over Windsor said that they were going to put 25 community wardens across our borough. Another promise that never actually made it to the budget. I would welcome any ideas for increased revenue generation from cross-party. Yeah, and I'm surprised that those who are mentioning these opportunities haven't already spoken to officers and actually contributed to the viability of the council, because that's why we're all here. Yeah, I'm also surprised, given comments made, that there's no amendments been proposed in this budget. If there's all these things that can be done, then I'd expect to see them costed and here. So, you know, I'm also surprised to hear from councillors who voted for the maximum council tax rise for 4 years in the medium term budget last year, now saying that the maximum council tax shouldn't happen now. Do you believe in it or don't you? I'm going to leave it there. There's so much that have been said that's wrong, and so much that is just words. But our first priority is financial stability. We cannot do anything without financial stability. We cannot provide the services that the residents want and need without the money to do it. And the only way to do that is put back the financial stability into this council, which has been lost over the last decade. Thank you very much.
Are there any requests to speak from anybody remotely? We have nobody joining remotely anyway. So we are now at the end of the debate. I think we're all agreed. The recommendations are set out on page 32 of the package, and there's far too many to put on the screen, which we normally do, or to read them all out line by line. In a case, all the headings are taken as a whole for approval, not individual items. So we are going to conduct a named vote, it's required by the Constitution. So, Kirsty.
Thank you, councillors. I've opened your microphones. If you could please indicate when asked if you are for, against or abstain. Councillor Baskerville. For. Councillor Beaumont. For. For. Councillor Blonde. For. Councillor Bra. For. Councillor Buckley. For. Councillor Del Campo. For. Councillor Carpenter. Yes. Councillor Coe. For. Councillor Carol da Costa. For. Councillor Wisdom da Costa.
Against.
Councillor Cross. For. Councillor Devon Davies. For. Councillor Karen Davies. For. Councillor Douglas. Councillor Gosling.
Against.
Councillor Grove. For. Councillor Hill. For. Councillor Howard. For. Councillor Hunt.
Against.
Councillor Jones. For. Councillor Knowles.
For.
Councillor Larkham.
For.
Councillor Luxton.
Yes.
Councillor Majid.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Moriarty.
For.
Councillor Price.
For.
Councillor Reeves.
For.
Councillor Reynolds.
For.
Councillor Sharp.
Yes.
Councillor Shaw.
For.
Councillor Gertsing.
For.
Councillor Story. Councillor Taylor.
For.
Councillor Amy Teasy.
For.
Councillor Julian Teasy.
For.
Councillor Werner.
For. Result is 34 and 8 Against. Therefore, the motion is carried. Before we finish off this evening, I'd just like to apologise to Mrs. Sarah Walker for the way she was heckled earlier this evening. It was frankly unacceptable. If we're going to encourage people to take part in local democracy, we've got to behave better than that. So I do apologise. Thank you everyone for attending, and I now declare the meeting closed.